It's the Rooks and Becords podcast, episode 12. My name is Ted Asregadoo, and with me in the co-pilot seat is John Young. And we'll be cruising at an altitude of around 6 feet in this episode. Wait, what? What did you say? Well, if you listened to our previous episode, you know that John and I were flying high with our top 5 rock albums from 1981. Well, to flip that a bit by talking about albums that followed huge blockbusters. You know, for every blockbuster like Led Zeppelin 1 and 2, there was Led Zeppelin 3, or following the massively popular Rumors album, Fleetwood Mac releases Tusk, or Michael Jackson's follow-up to Thriller, which was called Bad. And some people thought it was bad, but it wasn't all bad. It's not that these records were lousy, it's just that there was a certain disappointment from the public that the band or the artist couldn't quite catch lightning twice in a row. So, John, we took a little break between episodes, but now we're back in the proverbial New York groove. See what I did there? Kiss reference right off the bat.
Thank you.
We've got our disappointing follow-ups locked and loaded and ready for you out there to agree or disagree with. And before we get started, you know, you can follow us on the socials if you want. I'm on the Twitters at T Asregadoo. That's the letter T, Asregadoo. And John, where can our vast audience find you?
I'm easy to find on Twitter at JCYLCSW, which really just stands for John Cole Young, Licensed Clinical Social Worker, but you don't need to remember that. Just go to JCYLCSW and join my vast Twitter army of folks who like to hang out on social media.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about all sorts of things on social media. It's not always about music. So follow us along, and we'll also update you on when new episodes drop. So in case you're just like, when did it come out? There's Ted. Oh, there's John. Hey, they're highlighting the episode. And you know, you can always subscribe to our podcast on really almost every podcast platform I've listed it on, from Apple to Google to Stitcher, Amazon, Audible, Spotify. Did I miss anybody? I probably did. Oh yeah, iHeartRadio. I've also loaded it up on YouTube. So plenty of places to find us. So wherever you get your podcasts, Rooks and Becords is probably there. So we're going to talk about our top 5 follow-ups. And they're not all rock albums, but they're follow-up records from massively successful albums that an artist or a band had released. I've got my top 5. John's got his top 5. I'm going to let him go first.
Thank you, Ted. You're so polite when it comes to that kind of thing. A polite podcaster you are. My number 5, we're calling these disappointing follow-ups, but again, as Ted pointed out, they're not necessarily a total musical or artistic disappointment. They just don't compare to the album they followed.
Right. Exactly.
My number 5, thank you for that explanation, John. My album is Let It Be, the Beatles record, the actual last official record that was released while the band was technically together. It came out in 1970. It followed the immensely popular and artistically amazing Abbey Road, which came out in the late summer of 1969. The trick here is Let It Be was actually recorded before Abbey Road was recorded. The Beatles got together in early 1969 at Twickenham Studios in England and set about trying to get the band back to the rock roots that they started in. Problem, of course, at this point, they're all in their late 20s for the most part, millionaires, going through all kinds of different personal changes and issues and substance abuse stuff. And the sessions that produced the music that ultimately came out on Let It Be were fraught with disagreements and musical issues and poor playing and all kinds of crazy stuff that happened. The ultimate body of work that was produced when they recorded Let It Be, although there are some nuggets in there, you know, it's the Beatles, for crying out loud. I mean,
sure, yeah. I mean, it's like pound for pound greatness, right?
Right. There's some beautiful music that was made, but it was made in a cauldron of anger, according to some folks who were close to the sessions. And ultimately, they released it after they went into the studio later in 1969 and produced one of the greatest albums they've ever done, arguably one of the best rock albums ever, Abbey Road. So they get the buzzer, if I had one, for Let It Be, only because Abbey Road established such a high watermark, not just for the Beatles, but for rock bands in general, that when Let It Be came out, it was kind of a dud. The production was a little They had brought Phil Spector in, who did some
Yeah.
crazy stuff to their original mixes that didn't sound very Beatlesque compared to what George Martin had done with them for so many years. So that's why Let It Be, although still an amazing album in and of itself, and it's got some great history, and I love the cover art. It shows the Beatles at the end of the 60s with the long hair and all other cool stuff. But they still make my number 5 of disappointing follow-ups to amazing records that they came after.
Interesting. I would agree with that pick as far as the Beatles catalog is concerned because of the production. I mean, that's Phil Spector stuff was kind of weird. And did you buy Let It Be Naked, the one that came out in 2003, where they took out all the effects and it was just, just the band playing and without any of the studio trickery?
Right. I won't say I one up you, but I can go back to an album that came out in the late 70s. It was a Beatles rarity record released
Mhm.
by Capitol that had a couple of those cuts you're talking about. So I got to hear that when I was 15. I got to hear Across the Universe with no backing orchestration. I got to hear Let It Be. Long and Winding Road is really the one that's stark without all that string work that Phil Spector added to it. So yes, I have heard some of the cuts off of the Naked Let It Be album. Not to be confused with the Naked Two Virgins record that John Lennon and Yoko Ono released around that same time.
Yeah,
That's just historical in nature. There's no good music on that sucker, but they still had to wrap it in a brown paper bag because of the nudity.
like Led Zeppelin's In Through the Outdoor. They wrapped it in a paper bag because I think their manager said, we could wrap any Led Zeppelin record in a paper bag and people would buy it. And then they just sort of did that and people did buy it.
And they did buy
That
it.
one did not make my top 5. I do actually like that record a lot, In Through the Outdoor. We can get into that in another podcast episode. But my number 5 is Dire Straits' On Every Street that came out in 1991. Now, this comes after the 10 times platinum Brothers in Arms in 1985. Just a monster album, right?
Right.
That album produced so many hits and it was just on the airwaves seemingly between 1985 and 1986 a lot. And there's still the songs that are played, like Money for Nothing is still played a lot on classic rock radio. So On Every Street comes out 6 years later in 1991. It's not that it's a bad record, but just after 6 years, the band sounded bored and the songs were kind of, they were retreads of some of Brothers in Arms, like Heavy Fuel, which went to number 1 in mainstream rock radio, but it sounded like a retread of Money for Nothing. Calling Elvis, which I really like because there's like 3 layers of guitar work going on in there. It's a good song, but it goes on for like 6 minutes and it's a little bit plodding. But to me, the standout track on the record is On Every Street. And while there's undoubtedly people who probably like or absolutely love this record and are going to go like, oh, I believe it's one of their best in the catalog. No, it's one of my least favorites by the band. And I absolutely adore this band. I've been a Dire Straits fan since probably about 1981, 82, really, when I started understanding that, oh, there's something really special about this band, that they're really good. But this album, boy, for it to be the last album by the group was a real disappointment because after that, Knopfler disbanded the entire operation and he went solo and he never looked back. He has no desire to even go back to visiting Dire Straits. Even when they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he didn't show up. So that's my number 5.
Well, and that could be the subject of another podcast too, like what the F are you thinking? But we'll save that for another one. And I'll jump into my number 4. My number 4 record is the album Tonight by David Bowie, which, correct me, you're the Bowie guy. It came out in 84, a year
84.
after the unbelievably gazillion selling amazing record Let's Dance. This may be a little obvious, although the reason I picked it, Ted, was to poke the bear a little bit when it comes to you, because I know you love this record Tonight.
I do.
You loving the Alien and Blue Jean. But other than loving the Alien and Blue Jean, I'm not sure how this album even thinks it's in the same category as a record like Let's Dance, which not only had multiple hits, but had that Nile Rodgers and Stevie Ray Vaughan guitar work and production to it that made Let's Dance so catchy, especially for a David Bowie album, which of course he's a catchy artist and he certainly had catchy tunes in the canon prior to Let's Dance, but Let's Dance blew the doors open and got him another gazillion fans across the planet. I ran out and bought Tonight because I assumed here comes Let's Dance 2. And I was let down.
I see that. And I can agree with a lot of what you just said. And I think that with Bowie, that's the one thing about him. He always likes to go in, quote, a different direction with each album, usually. He rarely likes to repeat himself. But with Tonight, I felt like with Loving the Alien, like you said, that was the lead track. It's a long track too. It's over 7 minutes long. I really liked it. The cover of the Beach Boys, God Only Knows, was god horrible. I mean, it was just the worst. That was the one I could not stand. I was like, every time that came on, I would just skip over it and go right to the title track with Tina Turner. But then the second side, or I always say side two, because we, era of albums here where you had one side and the other. And even with the cassette, you still had one side and the other. Neighborhood Threat, Tumble and Twirl, I Keep Forgetting, and Dancing with the Big Boys with Iggy Pop on there. I really liked those songs. I even like Blue Jean. And I don't know. I mean, most reviewers who gave this album a serious listen came away with it with pretty much how you felt. It was just like, wow, this is it. This is kind of a tepid affair. It's really not that good.
The point you make is a good one. And as I reflect and I'm listening to your analysis of the record, I was disappointed at the time because I had gotten into the dance pop gnarliness of the Let's Dance record. Then Tonight comes out. But I did run out and buy it because it's Bowie. And the second point you make that's amazing and true is Bowie's albums are never like the album that preceded it. His whole artistic shtick, if you will, is, I do something different every time. I'm recalling an interview with David Bowie where he talks about rock and roll is such a great mongrel. You can take so many different things from rock, and that's what I love. It's such a mongrel. Like, okay, well, only David Bowie would use the term mongrel to define rock and roll, but that's what he takes from it. It's a great way to do all kinds of different stuff, and that's what he did with the album Tonight. What's your four?
And it's a bit of a diamond dog mongrel, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Hello. You understand? You see where I'm going with that?
Of course I do. What's your
I'm doing
four,
stand-up
Ted?
comedy. I'll be doing stand-up comedy at Ha-Ha's on First Street.
Right.
Well, come on down. See me
at hahas.com.org.
My number 4 is Robin, Honey. Now, a lot of people may not know who Robin is. She did have a minor hit in the United States with a song called Show Me Love, which sounded a lot like a Britney Spears song because it was produced by the same people who produced Britney Spears' first album. This album came out in 2010. No, it did not. It came out in 2018. In 2010, what I meant to say was that Robin, who's a Swedish kind of a dance pop queen, she released this record called Body Talk, and it has one of her 2 most recognized songs on there. One is called Dancing on My Own, and the other one's called Call Your Girlfriend, which if you get a chance, just go on YouTube and look for Saturday Night Live performance, Robin, Call Your Girlfriend, and you'll see what I'm talking about. She's really a fantastic performer. The song is catchy as hell, and I absolutely loved Body Talk. It was one of my top albums for 2010. Flash forward 8 years later, 2018, she had a number of personal issues. She broke up with her boyfriend. She reconciled with him later, and I think she's married to him. A good friend of her passed away. She releases Honey, and this album was well received by the critics, but gosh, it's kind of a somber affair. I mean, it's not like these are all ballads or anything. It's all very dance oriented, but the title track is my favorite song of the bunch. It's hypnotic. It's also kind of subtle. It's got hooks in its production. It's good, but like I said, it's subtle, if that term can be applied to dance music. So the problem for me for this record is really this, is that not much really stands out on the record. It's all just sort of wallpaper for the ears, which is weird for a performer like Robin, who's very good at crafting very memorable hooks and using synth music in a very, very creative way. Yeah, it was hard for me to fall in love with this album. Even though I love Robin, I just didn't love Honey. So there you are. There's my number 4.
Leave it to Ted to take down Robin in the most intellectual way possible. Well, let's jump back to the 80s, if you will, with me, Ted, and examine the album 7 and the Ragged Tiger.
Oh, yeah.
By Duran Duran, right?
Or Duran.
Oh, Duran, man.
Duran, mate.
This record, oh my gosh, I have in my production notes here, amazing versus crap. And I'm talking about 7 of the Ragged Tiger as it compares to what could be one of the best albums by a pop new wave rock band, which is Rio, the album Rio that came out in 1982, chocked full of amazing hits. As you know, we're talking about the title track and Hungry Like the Wolf and Save a Prayer, and just such a great record Rio was. That Nagel cover that was so kind of iconic in 1982 at the time.
Right.
A year passes, Duran Duran become gigantic after Rio, and they tour the world a million times, and they change their hair color and haircuts a million times, trying to keep track of Simon Le Bon's hair. it's weird that I was doing that at the time, but yeah, it's like I wanted to look like him, and he would change it literally every time there was a new press photo of the band. But they tour for a year and a half. Then they go into the studio in late 1983 to record Seven and the Ragged Tiger. The title doesn't make any sense. I don't know who Seven is. I don't know who the Ragged Tiger is. It doesn't matter. I couldn't tell you. I bought the album because I was a huge Duran Duran fan, and I still am.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the one thing that saved that record is the single, The Reflex, which is a great pop tune. It's not as good as Hungry Like the Wolf or Rio or Planet Earth or Girls on Film or any of the other songs in the Duran Duran catalog. But The Reflex was big enough, and I was a big fan of it. I ran out and bought the record and just put it on the Reflex over and over again. Reflex, flex, 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 and bailed on the rest of the record. Of course, it was the beginning of sort of the end of the classic lineup of Duran Duran, and then they broke off into other little separate bands. Simon Le Bon formed a band called Arcadia with a few of the members, and it got messy after Seven and the Ragged Tiger. I hear that record or I see the album cover and I think, so this was the mail-in period. Is that what you guys are doing here? Yeah, we're kind of getting tired of each other. We've been on tour around the world for a million years. Maybe it's time to bail. And this album has that smell on it. Like, yeah, we're kind of getting done. We got one good single. Yeah, let's make, 14 other crappy songs and send this sucker out. What do you guys think, huh?
There was like 3 big singles off that record. It was Wild Boys that I remember was one of them, right? That was the big video that cost, I don't know how much money, but it was a huge production. And then New Moon on Monday was the second single probably.
You
and
went
then the
deep
Reflex
cuts on me, my friend. Yes, those are the two, but the Reflex was the big single, and the
big
Reflex
single,
was,
yes.
in my personal musician's opinion, is the better song. And after you get through those 3, you are really having to dig deep to find anything that other than just sort of background 80s synth music. The guitars are mixed way out, which drives me nuts. I love new wave music, but when you add real guitar to it and real drums, it feel like it's just a little more sassy.
3 good songs and the rest was filler.
Or, as my notes would say, amazing versus crap.
Yes, I think that's even better.
That's so mean to say that, because we're talking about these guys. These are all amazing artists and amazing producers and amazing work that goes into it. We're just having a little fun. Don't take it serious. No hate mail from Simon Le Bon's fan club people. I don't need that.
What kind of makeup did they use? They got better makeup after Rio, that's for sure.
Talk about a good looking crew. There's no doubt. I think my wife still has an unbelievably weird crush on the very handsome and very talented John Taylor. And can you blame her?
I have a crush on John Taylor too.
As do I. I'm more of a Nick Rhodes person, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Even for a guy who doesn't really play the keyboards, but has a lot of them, I'm into it.
Just that John Taylor bass work, It's
Well,
hard not to fall in love with him.
Thank you.
All right. My number 3 is the Smashing Pumpkins, Adore. That came out in 1998. Now, you may remember that the Smashing Pumpkins had a huge hit with a song called Tonight, Tonight. That came out in 1995 off the album Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. It was a big album. In fact, it took up 2 CDs worth of music. I really liked that record a lot. I liked the Siamese Dream, the album that came before that, more. But I thought Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness was really great. But it sold a lot of copies because of that song, Tonight, Tonight. Well, lead singer and band leader Billy Corrigan, he decided to pull a David Bowie and says, we're going in another direction. And he fired the drummer, Jimmy Chamberlain, who is a fantastic drummer. And if it wasn't for him, some of these Smashing Pumpkin songs wouldn't sound half as good. So he's gone behind the kit. And so the band goes into the acoustic electronic mode. They put out a 73-minute disc of music that is not the Smashing Pumpkins, that what most people were expecting. There's no thundering guitar. There's no big underbelly of drums. None of that is there. It's all sort of acoustic. But the acoustic songs that they do, a couple of them stand out. One is called To Sheila and the other one's called For Martha. And when I was re-listening to this record before the podcast, I thought to myself, in 1998, when this album came out, I was just like, what is this? Just along with the record buying public too. But now, with some time and distance, you listen to it and you think, oh, it's not so bad. But then you realize, or at least I realized, well, what came before it? Yeah, it was kind of bad for the time. So the record buying public kind of gave it the thumbs down. Critics were like, what's going on with the Smashing Pumpkins? And the thing really didn't sell all that much. It's become sort of a cult favorite among some Smashing Pumpkins fans. And I'm sure, like any of these records, there's going to be people out there that absolutely loved it. But Not me. I'm not one of them. I just looked at it, was like, wow, that was a real disappointment.
When you've got a song like Bullet with Butterfly Wings from Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, the record that previous to Adore, you've raised the bar high as a tight, amazing, still quasi new rock, whatever what you want to call it in 1995 was.
Yeah, kind of grungy in a way.
But
Yeah.
they were a little different than the standard, the grunge bands that the Smashing Pumpkins got lumped into. I agree with you 1,000%. This is one where we see exactly eye to eye. I think it's jarring to go from Bullet with Butterfly Wings and Tonight, those kinds of songs to the stuff that's on Adore. So I'm with you.
All right. You're number 3.
Yes. I hate to keep dragging you kicking and screaming back into the 80s, Ted. But this one,
right.
These are all albums I bought. And I think I just remember so distinctly the letdown that came with putting the needle down on these suckers. And this one is Agent Provocateur. How am I pronouncing that correctly? This is the Foreigner record that came out after Foreigner 4. The album that I think we should have mentioned it in Greatest Albums of 1981. As I mentioned to you off podcast Mike, I thought that Foreigner 4 came out in 1982, but no, it didn't, officially in 81. The reality is Foreigner 4 was an amazing record. It was a great rock record. It was a great pop record. It had Junior Walker playing a sax solo on Urgent. I mean, come on.
Thomas Dolby on the keyboards on
Exactly.
Urgent too. Yeah.
Then they released Agent Provocateur. Well, the reason this album stands out as a disappointment, listen, I Want to Know What Love Is. It's a great song. It's wonderful. It's
good
pop,
ballad.
but it's the beginning of Lou Gramm, the lead singer, getting disaffected with the way Mick Jones, the chief provocateur of Foreigner, what he's doing and where he's taking the band. Google or look on YouTube interviews with Lou Gramm and Mick Jones, and some of them together, where they're both recognizing that it was this album that started to drag the band into a pop sensibility and a lot of pop balladry that Lou Gramm was not that happy with. Lou Gramm he wanted to keep singing Hot Blooded and, Double Vision and the rock songs, Jukebox Hero. And he was not happy with the direction of the band. And this was the beginning of the end of the Lou Gramm era. So when I look at this album, it stands out to me as a sort of the beginning of the teardown of what we knew as Foreigner at the time.
Agent Provocateur, or if you want to be all fancy about it, Agent Provocateur. With like a real
Agent Provocateur. How has it been? Foreigners, they're breaking up over this. Is that right?
The Agent Provocateurs. Just for now. So you're right. Was this the record that had Say You Will? Was that also on that record?
I don't know if this one had Say You Will. I should have the album in my hand. I got to go back to my collection. Will someone go get me my record, please? He said to no one. Okay, right.
Let me do a quick search and see if I can find it.
Right.
Let's see what they've got here.
Say You Will, right. Say You Will is a great song. And then when they do it acoustic live, it's beautiful, but it's still not. Where's the Jukebox Hero, brother? Where's Hot Blooded? Where's that guitar focused rock that Lou Gramm loved so much? It just isn't on that record. And that's the beginning of that.
And neither is that song Say You Will. That was not on Agent Provocateur.
No, Agent of the Tatar. Huh?
But I Want to Know What Love is undoubtedly, one of their biggest.
Yeah, it's a big hit. That's what I mean. We talked about this. These albums are not bad albums necessarily. They may have one or two really outstanding hits, and we'll keep going on. But the reality is, they just don't, in my humble opinion, it doesn't compare to Foreigner 4. It's a weak follow-up, as we say.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've got one even weaker than Agent Provocateur by Foreigner, and it's Devo's Shout that came out in 1984. Now, this comes right after the brilliant 1982 record, Oh No, It's Devo. And that had some fun songs like Peekaboo, That's Good, Time Out for Fun, Speed Racer, and a whole lot of others. In fact, that whole record is just a lot of fun to listen to. This record has absolutely none of the brilliance, imagination, or even the songcraft that Devo had in previous records. To me, their biggest embarrassment on this album is their cover of Are You Experienced by Jimi Hendrix. It's almost laughable in a bad way. Like, wow, what happened to you guys? We used to be in on the joke, and now you are the joke when you're doing this song. Now, they covered the Stones' Satisfaction, and I thought that was a brilliant cover, but this record has nothing that stands out. It's just song after song that sounds something like Devo, but there's nothing that's really all that memorable. And so that ended up as my number 2.
And I would agree with you 100%. I would also give you credit for actually buying a Devo album after 1982. Well done, Ted. You have a deep record
Maybe
collection, my friend.
it was inertia. That's
Yeah,
what was happening.
honestly. Well, let's get to our number 1, shall we? Because again, a little bear poking going on here with my number 1. You may recall from the previous podcast that one of my top albums of 1981 was the AC/DC classic, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. It also makes my most disappointing follow-up number 1 because it's following Back in Black. I don't care how good you think For Those About to Rock, We Salute You is, it can't even stand in the same shower stall as Back in Black for a variety of reasons. Now, and I'll try to break them down quickly. The reality is you're trying to match songs, riffs, and production from Back in Black that are just impossible to do. Brian Johnson, the lead singer at that time, he had just started with the band on the Back in Black record. He pretty much blew out every amazing vocal trick he had in the book on that album, and they captured it, and it's awesome. I don't know how much production Mutt Lange had to layer on that, but he's doing some stuff that's Robert Plant-like on Back in Black. He may have blown a vocal cord or two, who knows, because there's no way to sustain it. And you see that in the albums that subsequently follow. But the other thing is the songwriting on For Those About to Rock. It's got some great songs, including the title track and one of my favorites, Let's Get It Up. But when I start looking at the track listings, this is an evil record. This record is borderline horror show. Song titles, Evil Walks, Care of the Devil, Night of the Long Knives, Inject the Venom. There's no sunshine on this record at all. In fact, Let's Get It Up is the only song that even has some sort of a nod to having a good time. Everything else is, and For Those About to Rock, the problem with For Those About to Rock, it's a very plodding song. That's a slow 4/4 beat that you've got to be waiting for that chorus because it's kind of, there's nothing peppy or poppy about it. And every other song on here makes you want to turn it into the police or the FBI to have them follow up because it's just that dark.
I agree with you, my friend. I was not a big fan of that album. I liked some of what they did, but it didn't have the brilliance of Back in Black. Back in Black was just a brilliant record, front to back.
Yes, exactly. Curious where you went with number 1, Ted, because sometimes you'll take us on a musical journey and I'm strapped in and ready to go.
Kiss Dynasty in 1979, and it was because of the disco-fueled hit I Was Made for Loving You. And now, if it wasn't for Ace Frehley's contributions to that album, to me, Dynasty would have really sucked because you had some you had some great songs by Ace Frehley, and he's not a great singer, but he really brought it in terms of hard rock. I mean, he did the cover of the Rolling Stones' 2000 Man. He had one called Hard Times, which I really like, Save Your Love, which was okay. But I think that this all sort of was to remind fans who weren't along for the detour into Discoville why Kiss was a kick-ass hard rock band. Paul Stanley may have been inspired by dancing 5 nights a week at New York's famed club Studio 54 to write that disco hit along with Desmond Child and Vinnie Poncia. But Ace Frehley kind of saved the group for their hard rockin' fans. But it wasn't enough for me because that was the album that I kind of broke up with Kiss over. It was just sort of like, wow, this thing? I know I've talked about my oldest brother before in the podcast, but it was my oldest brother who had come home one day when the single I Was Made for Loving You was released. And he comes in the door, he goes, "Hey, Ted, well, I finally like a song by that band you like." And I'm all like, "Which one?" He's all, "Kiss." And I'll say, "Which song?" He goes, "That new one, the I Was Made for Loving You." And I was like, "The disco song? Oh God." So
you're killing me,
so
big
you
brother.
you can see the older brother was into the disco stuff and the youngest brother, not so much, more like into the hard rock and stuff. So that was the album that I broke up with. And, to be honest, there wasn't much to that record for me, beyond the Ace Frehley songs. Maybe there was a Paul Stanley song in there that I'm missing, but I guess the disco hit kind of like was such the big footprint on this thing that it was really hard for me to focus on anything else.
I hear
but you're a bigger Kiss fan, so you may have listened to this album with more objective ears, with some time and distance and I don't know. Am I missing something?
No, you're not. In fact, you're making a great point. Ace Frehley single-handedly saved this album. I would say the only exception being Paul Stanley's Sure Know Something, which is on this album, was the second single off the album. But the disco hit, in quotes, I Was Made for Loving You, took over the airwaves and rebranded Kiss in such a weird way that nobody paid attention to anything else that came off this record, including Sure Know Something. But give Ace credit, that great little 20-second or less lead break that's in I Was Made for Loving You is the only rock thing about that song. And that's right. Ace going, well, listen, I got to put something in this record to make it kind of rock, so I'm going to do a little quick little lead break. If you guys don't care, are you all right with that, Paul? And apparently he was. Gene Simmons, to give him the ire that he deserves, this record is an example of when Gene Simmons wants to mail in material for a record, this is how it sounds. Just utter rock and roll garbage. There's no creativity to it. Nothing rocks.
I have it in my notes. It just basically says Gene Simmons songs, nothing special.
Awful.
There wasn't anything
awful. I agree with you. It's just interesting when you look at this as a follow-up to what album? Do you look at this as a follow-up to Love Gun? Okay, because you had the live record that came out around Alive 2, which had some original material. I was just wondering where you were, but that makes sense. Love Gun is a superior record with the title track alone burying anything that's on Dynasty.
Absolutely. I like how you use the British pronunciation.
I went Australian on you, actually. Like, you guys like Dynasty, right? That's what I Was Made for Loving You.
Like Dynasty. Right? Yeah, I like it.
All right. Now
Peter Criss was largely absent from this record too, right?
Anton Fig, the drummer for the David Letterman band, was called in to do the drumming. And the drumming is serviceable and sounds a little bit like Peter Criss. Peter Criss actually played drums on one track on Dynasty, and that was Dirty Livin', which he wrote. And I guess they said, well, if Peter's written this song, we should let him play drums. What do you think, Paul? And that was the beginning of the end of the Peter Criss era, was essentially this album, the last time you ever heard him until, subsequent reunion tours. But this was it. This was the end of Criss.
Did he write that song for his solo record and was just left off, or did he actually write it for Dynasty?
I would like to dedicate an entire podcast to the awfulness of Peter Criss's solo album that you're referring to, because it is monumentally awful. And I'm not sure Dirty Living is actually a better song than anything that's on the Peter Criss solo album. So if he left Dirty Living off his solo album, maybe he should have put it on the solo album and it wouldn't have been so wretched.
I think the solo albums are going to have to be featured in the Kiss Corner at some point, because while the album covers were really great, because
cool.
You had these really great sort of paintings of them and everything, what was on the vinyl was something else. I mean, they weren't all bad in terms of like Ace Frehley's was probably the best of the lot.
Absolutely.
And then you can kind of rank them. We'll do that another time. But Dynasty kind of
that created your divorce filing. It sounds like.
And it actually wasn't until you and I worked on an article for Popdose about the best non-makeup albums that Kiss released during the 80s. And I went back and I listened to them because I never listened to them very intensely before.
Right.
Yeah, but you had, because you remained a fan. You and I took our own rankings and did, sort of side by side and compared them. And I liked one album maybe more than you did, but we were sort of lined up in the way in which it all sort of washed out. And what surprised me through those records in the 80s was how much Paul Stanley saved that band, because there are a lot of really good songs on those non-makeup albums during the 80s that I sort of like gave up on and went into sort of alternative rockville. That was my thing at that point throughout the 80s. So I'd pretty much abandoned Kiss. So until you sort of brought me back and said, you might want to re-listen to these, now, because they're not as bad as you think. There are actually some great songs on
You make a great point. Paul Stanley is sometimes an underrated songwriter and producer for all of his stage antics and his kind of C+ guitar playing. He doesn't get the credit that I think he deserves for not only keeping the band together, as you point out, but actually writing some pretty good, decent hard rock songs between 1982 and 1992.
Right.
Now let's dive into this, Ted. Last time we got together with this top 5 craziness, you turned to me and said, so do you have an honorable mention? And caught me quite flat-footed. And I was, reasonably embarrassed. So now I feel like you should go first with your honorable mention.
After I've been chatting the whole time. Okay, I will take it then. My honorable mention is Prince's Around the World in a Day. This came after Purple Rain Of course, Purple Rain was everywhere. This was a monster hit for Prince. It made him into the superstar that he became. He was already becoming a star with 1999 and Controversy, but Purple Rain, of course, pushed him into the mainstream with lots of top 40 hits, videos all over MTV. And then what did he do? He releases Around the World in a Day, which had two hits. It had Raspberry Beret and Pop Life. Those were the two big singles that came off the record. But if you listen to the rest of the album, it was this weird meld of psychedelic sounds and wailing and weird noodling on the guitar. And it was almost like he was doing a poison pill just to say, I don't want to happen to me what happened to Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's Thriller comes out and it doesn't go away for years. In fact, it becomes such a mainstay that people get burnt out on it. And I think Prince wanted to preserve at some level, and I'm thinking maybe this is the case, but because he was very strategic in how he managed his career, but to put out this record that was the anti-Purple Rain, yeah, it had some hits on it, but it suddenly made people go, what's going on with Prince, man? This is weird. But yeah, Around the World in a Day, not a very good album from front to back, but there's some good songs on there, I would say. But it really sort of let the air out of the balloon, the balloon for Prince for a while.
And you know why I think your argument has some legs about Prince sort of strategically maybe putting together a poison pill and, shoving it down the record company's throat and just seeing what happens when the public accepts it is this is around the time that he wrote Manic Monday for the Bangles. I think it's around the same time that album came out. And that was a gigantic hit. Now, a hit that if I play it again on KUIC, I'm going to lose my mind because we play it too much, frankly. But the reality is he was still at the top of his game as a pop songwriter. So the weird stuff you're talking about on Around the World in a Day, it doesn't match up with what his capability was. And part of that is borne out by work that he did for other artists.
The Bangles song really, obviously helped the Bangles because they were also a band who had a lot of success with All Over the Place. Great album, by the way, has some excellent songs that have a throwback to sort of a 60s vibe. And then Manic Monday comes out and then they become sort of superstars. I mean, that song alone really sort of solidified them as a mainstream act. That and Walk Like an Egyptian, another song if I ever have to play again, I'll probably lose my mind along with you. So we'll be both in the same insane asylum.
Yes,
so
enjoy our honorable mentions in the insane asylum.
And what about your honorable mention, my friend?
I am going to walk into dangerous territory here because I know what an incredibly committed and sometimes psychotic Rush fan that you are. My honorable mention, not disastrous follow-up, but not quite following up the way that it maybe could have, is the album Signals by Rush, which came out in 1982. As if I have to tell you that. You were probably there at the day that the albums were delivered to your record store.
Went down to Tower Records at midnight to try to get it.
Who's that kid out there? Is that Ted? Yeah, he's waiting. Anyway, Signals followed up the monstrosity of a record that was Moving Pictures. Moving Pictures is not only one of the best, if not the best Rush album, but it was one of the best rock albums of the 80s. And it came out in 81 and it still holds up to anything, even today. It's just, the songcraft and the playing and the rock intensity of it, and yet the perfection, and it's still raw. It's crazy good. But Signals is an interesting record. It doesn't rock hard enough for me. I think New World Man could have benefited from vocal harmonies that Geddy Lee never did because he had such a interesting and high-pitched voice that I guess he never thought to maybe harmonize with himself. And that was kind of an afterthought onto that record. I know Subdivisions was a big deal and there was a thematic thing going on there. But the reason that this album comes up in my honorable mention category is it was the album that I bought for my brother's 16th birthday to try to woo him over to the Rush party that I had fully joined in with Moving Pictures. Having listened to Signals, I knew it was a little bit more, it almost had a new wave, a lot of keyboards, not a ton of Alex Lifeson's guitar. And I thought my brother, Mr. New Wave boppity bop guy, might decide he likes Rush more if he starts off with this. That's how it made my honorable mention. It's not a bad record, but is it an adequate follow-up to Moving Pictures? It just isn't, in my opinion.
And did your brother become a Rush fan because of that record?
He did not. In fact, he looked at me. I think he thanked me for buying it for him and then ran out to our Tower record store in El Toro down in Southern California and bought the new Suburban Lawns album. Okay. I could not convince him that these three amazing Canadians were just the greatest trio ever besides Cream, and he just wasn't buying it. I find out things about Rush I never would have known had I not become friends with you.
That's true. I will take any opportunity to talk about Rush, and I'm one of those guys that just like, oh, for God's sakes, just stop with the Rush talk.
I learn a lot
Even
from you, Ted, and you can probably convince me that maybe I need to give Signals more credit than it gets.
to be perfectly honest, I wasn't too thrilled with Signals when it came out because I was expecting more of that hard rocking sound that Moving Pictures had. Subdivisions, which is super keyboard heavy, and it sort of builds. There's some great drum work on there, and even Alex has a decent solo on there. Now they sort of redeem themselves with Analog Kid, which I absolutely adore. I think that's a fan favorite as well. Digital Man is great. Chemistry's okay. The Weapon, I did like that, even though it was very keyboard heavy as well. Losing It was a fabulous song. In fact, they played it at the R40 tour. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's sort of about fading talent and people who lose their abilities, like a writer or a dancer. And it's just sort of this tragic tale. And they played it at the R40 tour. So it had kind of a special resonance because I think most of the fans knew this was it. They were going to retire after this. And so when they played it, it felt like, well, these guys are going out kind of at the top of their game. They're not fading, but they don't want to fade in front of their fans. And then there was Countdown, which had sort of astronaut talk about the shuttle launch and everything. So they used like the NASA comm talk between the astronauts and Houston. That one is not a fan favorite. That one gets a lot of unlove, a lot of hate. There are people are like, I can't stand Countdown.
Can we just use the term unlove? Because you and I are not haters, and we are lovers. Not the two of us, but I mean, we do love to love. I like unlove. It just has a little less darkness than the word hate.
Yes. So that's my view of Signals. I understand that there was a lot of new wave flourishes on that record because they were very influenced by the Police. You can hear it on, especially on Digital Man,
Right.
And even the sort of the drum feel on Analog Kid. That has kind of a new wave dance beat to it almost. Which is strange for a Rush song. I did warm up to this record after a while. It took me a while, but now I really do like it from that 80s era. So
can we still be friends even though I picked a Rush album in a dark light? Okay, just want to make sure
absolutely
that hasn't somehow affected on a
no. I mean,
level.
look, I dissed a Kiss record, and I know you're a fan, but you're not a fan of that record as much. So you know,
I just want to make sure our relationship hasn't taken any hits with some of this stuff. I'm going to veer away from any negative Rush talk, probably just to protect our relationship.
No, absolutely. I think I would welcome it because I think with a lot of Rush fans are like NASCAR fans in a way. They're just super loyal about their band. You know, it's just like, no, Rush is everything, you know, and there's no bad albums with Rush, but there are. Of course there are. There are bad songs. Even the group would acknowledge there are weaker songs and things like that. And not everything is great.
Rush fans, like NASCAR fans, just more teeth.
Sometimes better education.
Sure.
Many of them go on. You know, there's a lot of, there's the freaks and there's the geeks. The geeks went on to become like computer programmers and engineers and all of that.
Before we lose all of the NASCAR audience, let's wrap this up on a positive note. There are even every album that we picked that was not a strong follow-up, all had something to recommend it. There was probably one or two songs. We are music fans before we are music critics. If it weren't for all those albums, we wouldn't have had anything to rock out to or talk about into our 50s. So I thank all the artists that were part of this unfortunate lineup that we discussed over this podcast.
I 100% agree with you, and I think that's a perfect way to end the podcast. But before we go, let's just remind people where they can find us on the socials. John, you first.
That's right. Please check out my social media account on the Twitter, which is JCYLCSW, all in caps. If you can remember John Cole Young, licensed clinical social worker, wait, you can't. So just go JCYLCSW and give me a tweet.
And I am at T Asregadoo. The letter T, ASREGADOO, also on Twitter, and you can find me there. And both John and I, we tweet about a lot of different things, not always music, but sometimes we do. And we both want to thank you for joining us on the Rooks and Becords podcast. Until next time, we'll see you.
Take care, Ted. Love you, man.
Love you too. And love all of you. Thank you for listening.